Hello folks, welcome back to my channel Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan. Today we're going to discuss all sorts of things which I found since my return. One of the things was I found that very few people actually think. They do things automatically or like machines. And the level of incompetence which follows is something I just could not believe was possible. Now this Babu Giri phenomenon is something I could explain possibly with two personal examples, things which actually happened. I was in a field on a farm and the boss happened to be standing next to me. There were a couple of bricks lying in front of us and I moved to pick it up and throw it to the side of the field. The boss told me, "No, that is not your job. If you do that, you're not an officer." 100 yards away, there's a gang of laborers working. He roared across, one of them came running. He told him to move those 3 bricks and then shouted at him to go back. I mean, this is pure ego and officergiri, something which I didn't know. The next example came in an office where I sat there and watched the person banging away on his handbell for almost 45 minutes. And when the peon came, he shouted at him and then told him to give him a glass of water. Now that surahi was less than a yard away from his hand. The amount of time he wasted, the discomfort he put himself in, and my time which got wasted. I don't understand where they learned this from, except pure ego. Returning to India, I found incompetence just about everywhere. And the reason being the misconception that people were actually competent. Why? Because as long as they were promoted, it meant they were competent, which is what the Peter Principle says. Now, the Peter Principle says that a person keeps on getting promoted until he reaches his level of incompetence, beyond which he won't be promoted, which doesn't seem to fit in with what's happening here. What happens here is more in tune with something called Parkinson's Law, in a book by the greatest author of all, possibly, C. Northcote Parkinson himself. Now, Parkinson's Law, we're all aware of one, which is a very basic one, that is that work expands to fill the time available for it. But this is one of the minor ones. The main ones we never even think about. Some of the main ones are, we never hire superiors or peers. We only hire subordinates, which means over a period of time, each succeeding layer of administrators is of poorer quality than the previous one. Hence, the quality of everything seems to just go down. The other one is, most of us begin to become empire builders. A person is appointed. Before long, he thinks, oh, he's overworked, so he needs at least 2 assistants. Those 2 assistants in a year or 2 find they're overworked. They need 3 apiece underneath them. Here's the beginning of your first empire. By the time the original person is ready to retire, he's already got 30 or 40 people working under him. A nice little empire indeed. And why does he do that? To show his importance. More important, whatever he was doing, he would like it to be retained and maintained and continued long after he retires. The reason being that if things are changed, people will know that he was incompetent in the first place. This incompetence is explained by one other thing. The fact that we never question anything, because that's the way we train from a very early age. Had people had an inquiring or questioning mind, so many things. For instance, I had mentioned in one of the earlier videos about IR8. The recommendations were wrong and nobody questioned because they thought, well, the higher up people, the world famous people have said so, it must be right. We forget that even those people are just as liable to make a mistake as you or I. The milk industry is full of such examples. For instance, nobody understands the value of the overheads which have been built into the system. A third example which proves this incompetence is I was sitting somewhere with a bunch of people and somebody came in asking for clearance for a collaboration agreement to make a new tractor. Seeing me there, this man put me this question to me that look, it's a very good tractor. Why should it not be passed? My reaction to that was quite simply this. Look, we already have 14 different makes of tractor. Why do we want a 15th? Why do we want to pay a 15th time for the same one piece of know-how, how to make a tractor? And the answer to that from the backs came competition. Now, competition only arises when the market is saturated. Here, according to the papers presented, we had a need or a market for 110,000 units and a production capacity of only 40,000 units. So, where was the question of competition? Young people are getting increasingly frustrated because of this thumb rule: do not question, do precisely as you're told, nothing else. Most youngsters find this ridiculous. And the only way to get around so many of our problems is, you've heard of the three W's, the famous Worrell, Weeks, and Walcott. Well, instead of them, let's think of it this way. There are not three, but five W's and an H. The W's are what, when, why, where, who by, and a how. Now, these 6 questions you have to keep asking if you're fit to be a top man. Because anything and everything in life has to answer to at least one, if not more, of these 6 questions. Until you ask these questions, you can never change, because to do as you were told simply means doing and repeating what has been done for maybe 100 or 200 years. You cannot get out of that rut. Now, the other very big problem we've always faced, I faced it, a lot of other people have also faced, the eternal battle between, how shall I put it, the dominance of right-handed people over left-handedness. In many areas, it is just not permitted. A left-handed person often has his left hand tied behind his back to make him use his right hand, which simply means that much of his brain just doesn't develop, because it is known that in a left-handed person, the right side of the brain develops, and that is the dominant sector. If you do not allow it to develop at all, simply by not letting him use his left hand, you're discriminating against him, and his life will never be what it could have been. For instance, in cricket, for example, this is being corrected to quite some extent. During the 2011 World Cup, somebody came out with this statistic. Between 1876 and 1989, 210 left-handed batsmen took part in international cricket. Between 1990 and 2011, 285 left-handed batsmen had taken part, which is a big improvement. Yes, it's a step in the right direction. Long may it continue, not just in cricket, but other sport as well as other walks of life. Now, the other thing which I don't think many people have noted or even tried to understand. Have you ever noticed that in any athletic competition, all runners are running anti-clockwise? As long as the race is 200 meters or more, they're all running anti-clockwise. Why? Because this favors people who have a shorter left leg than right. It helps in enabling a person to turn. In the same way as a differential in a car permits you to turn simply because the differential slows down the left wheel and continues letting the right wheel go faster to enable you to turn left. However, supposing a person has a longer left leg than a right leg, his natural inclination is to run clockwise, because The shorter leg will then be on the inside. It helps him to complete and compete in a much easier and better way. Now, I learned this while watching a movie called Ben-Hur. When Ben-Hur observed that a team of chariots was going to cross because it couldn't complete a turn. Why? The fastest horse was on the inside and the slowest on the outside. The slowest horse did not have the pace to keep up, and therefore it could never turn because the inside horse was going much faster. Competence and incompetence crops up in all sorts of places. For instance, the Prime Minister Modi, his advice to people who could not find employment was sell pakoras. And the opposition jumped on him and said, that isn't even employment. If it wasn't employment, what is it? It is self-employment. And self-employment is a very, very good way of keeping yourself at least occupied. You don't lose the work habit. For instance, just after this happened, the papers came out with this story of a young man who used to travel from Kalyan to Mumbai every day with 1,000 samosas, which he would sell, and he kept 1 rupee per samosa for himself. The other 9 went to the person who made the samosas. Now, at 25,000 rupees a month, at least his expenses were being met. He wasn't running around looking for loans and things like that to run his house. Another example like this of self-employment was around 1980-82 in Gujarat. Now, just outside our campus, there are half a dozen tea stall owners. And one of them asked me one day about a person who was not behaving too well, who was, again, ego problem. And he said, what is he? I said, this man's a deputy director in one of these organizations here. And he said, what's his salary? Now remember, this is 1980-82. His salary then was around 2,000 a month, which was quite substantial in those days. And this guy, he put his hand in his pocket and said, is that all he makes? And he put this wad of notes in my hand and said, count it, sir. This is today's income after all expenses have been taken out. It happened to be 530 rupees. I was amazed because I went back home that night and said, where was the point in my getting myself educated, practical experience and so on 1,500 a month, and this guy earns 15,000 a month without any education or background. I mean, what an idiot I am. Now, this incompetence is a direct result of our never questioning anything and being told and brainwashed into doing exactly what we're told without any questioning and without any deviations. This is like somebody who came to me offering me milk-based sweets and said, try this, pure ghee, protein. I looked at him and I said, what do you mean protein? Since when was ghee protein? Then he came out with this. Were our forefathers fools when they said that ghee is protein? I had to tell him, look, the guy was totally ignorant. When you know how to make ghee, you make it from butter. And butter is also fat. There's no protein in it. You see, folks, may I leave you with this thought. Question and keep questioning. Because until you question, you won't learn how to think. Whatever you do at home, or in your travels, or in your workplace, think about it. Don't just do it because this has been done for 200 years, therefore we must continue with it. Because that, unfortunately, is what has been happening for too long. We're still doing what the British asked us to do, except it's Indian people. So please, whatever you do, think and question. And don't forget the 5 W's and an H. Those are your keys to future and future progress. Well, folks, I hope you liked this particular discussion. If you liked it, please press the bell icon, subscribe to my channel, Reality Check with Arvind Swaminathan, and share it with your friends and relatives, and ask them to share it with others too. Thank you. See you next time.